This is the London FinTech Podcast, brought to you by your host, Mike Ballerman, bridging the worlds of suits and t-shirts, of finance and technology, bringing you insights, stories, and inspiration from the golden age of opportunity and innovation happening in London right now.
Hi, this is Mike Ballerman, and this is London FinTech Podcast, episode 138, brought to you in association with Smart Pension. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Sachdev to discuss marketing as a topic. Shamir is founder and head of growth marketing agency Growth Gorilla, who help innovative startups and scale-ups catalyze growth. Marketing is a thematic topic that, strangely enough, we haven't dived into before. But in our crowded world, it is more important than ever. You may have noticed that build it and they will come ain't how the world works in the 21st century, unless you're building a fountain of liquid gold, but you're going to have a hard time making a profit with such a business, even if marketing takes care of itself. Actually, a prior incarnation of mine was a blog at thedowofbizdev.com, and that's Dow with a T, Tao, and I had a great time building some models and maps. There's some great free content there, and do check it out. A special shout out in this context goes to former guest and friend of the LFP, Alexandra Gaillard, and InvestGlass, who checked it out and enjoyed the content. Anyway, I mentioned that as an aside. I did say it was a former project. However, one of the key things for me in that was actually the necessity of defining marketing in the first place. The word is used so loosely and so widely to mean some very different things. For example, decades ago when I was marketing fixed interest fund management, it was a term used to cover both marketing and sales. Merchant bankers, after all, wouldn't do sales, far too tacky. We will ask Shamir what his definition of marketing is later. Mine was to find potential buyers of product or service, and when they have in principle interest, then hand them off to the sales department or process, whose role is to convert the right ones, you don't want the wrong ones, especially in B2B, from potential interest to signed contract, at which point you hand them off to the client department. Anyway, no long introduction needed today. Unlike last show's digital avatars, marketing has been around since the year dot, even if, like everything, it has changed massively in the digital age. Plenty to talk about, so let's get on with the show. Hi Shamir, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Mike, thanks for having me.
So, in terms of kicking this off, I asked you my usual question, which is, what's more interesting than your day job? And you, like about 90% of the people who've been on the show, say, I'm not sure, I'm a busy guy, I only have time for my day job. But actually, having put the thumb screws on you, you mentioned a couple of things which was interesting. Explosions and Borneo. Maybe we'll start with the explosions. Because obviously this is what you're trying to do in marketing, create an impact. Boom, boom. Sorry about that.
When I was about 17, 18 years old, I ended up having a job, which was quite a cool job in retrospect, of working as a lab technician for a fire research company, helping them to carry out controlled explosions, which was, it was quite exciting. It was quite unique as well.
What was the biggest thing that you sort of was blown up?
Well, we'd set fire to a house that was inside an aircraft hangar, whatever you call it, and that was quite a big ordeal. No one let the local fire service know, so they came rushing in, hoses blazing, and realised actually we were all just suited up, wearing lab coats. It turned out to be quite a little bit boring for them in the end.
Indeed. Okay, and then Borneo. Funnily, you should mention Borneo because I'm looking at our annual autumn trip to Southeast Asia, as it's turned into recently, and tossing up whether to go to Burma. But I don't really know whether we've got the time, or with Burma you tend to sort of run around from here to there, to there, to there, or whether we've actually both got the energy for running around an interesting but challenging country. And one of the other places that crossed my mind, which I haven't been for a long time, was Borneo actually, so it's the back of my mind, although I haven't actually got around to looking at what the weather is in Borneo. So what were you doing in Borneo? You said you were there for 3 months, studying orangutans, or?
You could say a little bit of that actually. I was out there for 3 months on one of these gap year Raleigh International type trips, so we spent 3 months out there.
Which part of Borneo?
Sarawak and Sabah. Yeah, we were doing some environmental work with some of the local communities, and then we also took a bit of time out to trek the Crocker Range, which was quite exciting. It was a reserve that was only limited to about 300 odd people at that time. They'd sort of walked across it, so we were sort of amongst the first people that went through.
And what was the tribe?
I don't know actually, to be honest. I'm sure I did know, but I've probably forgotten now.
Dayak are the ones, but I think the Dayak are the ones who have the canoes and that.
Yeah, I mean, with a small landfill, so no.
And I do remember, and this is like early 90s, I do remember, and it wasn't too touristy then, one place we visited actually had some of the shrunken skulls, because back in the day you had well, actually, you still had when they were there, and allegedly it didn't happen anymore. But you always wondered about what happens when there's a dispute with the local village. They were headhunters, so not in the recruitment sense. But also they had this impressive, if that's the right word, technology for not only taking your head, but actually then shrinking it down to a small size, which was something that stuck in my mind.
You're lucky we avoided them.
Result.
One or two did went missing.
You expect some attrition. And did you ever manage to get up Mount Kinabalu?
Unfortunately not, no.
I think it's quite hard. It's not that hard, but I mean, it's pretty hot at the bottom.
It was actually part of the itinerary, but unfortunately it got canned because it was coincided with the time that there was a terrorist attack in Bali, so they decided as a UK-based organisation they weren't going to take the risk. You know, unluckily we were compensated with going to stay in a 5-star hotel for 3 days, plenty of food and booze, so, you know, you have to take these things on the chin sometimes.
Back in the day, Borneo became famous when, in one of the first seismic shifts in FS, Nick Leeson managed to blow up bearings back in Singapore, and he skedaddled to the Shangri-La in Sabah, Kota Kinabalu, which is actually then where I stayed sort of a few months later, actually. Fantastic views of the sea, really good for taking sort of sunset photos and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so back in the day, you did interesting things. You blew stuff up, you went for months to Borneo. Now you're so boring, you just have to sort of work all the time. I don't know what's actually gone wrong, but how has your career journey gone from explosions and living in Borneo to marketing consultancy for fintechs, which is clearly very successful for you if you've spent all your time doing it?
Yeah, a bit of, well, not so unusual. I started off in the city as a broker.
Broking what?
Equity broking, predominantly. And bounced around for, you know, to a couple of different firms, Barclays being one of them. And then while I was at Barclays Wealth, having done this for a number of years, a friend of mine contacted me suggesting that he was setting up his own firm and asked me to join him. You know, I said no, I'd co-found it with you. So he did. We ran that for a couple of years, and then I exited that, actually selling my share off to him, and ended up eventually becoming marketing director for sales and marketing director for a financial services company, predominantly in spread betting and trading. So you know, probably the first incarnation of fintech, where we actually had an online trading platform, a web app.
And what year was this then?
So this would have been 2012. So yes, I was there for about 5 years, and you know, throughout my journey there, I saw the market developing, and there was lots of exciting new tech coming up. And I think my own entrepreneurial spark has sort of sparked again, and decided that I wanted to do something. And I really, really enjoyed marketing. I really enjoyed financial services and financial technology, and decided that I'd like to do that full time. Coupled with being invited into various consulting gigs, it fundamentally created the foundation for what Growth Gorilla is today. So in 2017, I handed in my notice and told my wife I was going to take a break for 3 months. And after about spending 3 weeks in the garden with my little one, I was incredibly bored of not doing anything, and I decided to get cracking. And we're here today.
Right, okay, so other than appearing on the greatest podcast on any topic in the world, later I shall ask you how you market marketing. But going back to the introduction and the theme, and you say you're a marketing and sales director, and that these terms get used by many people to mean many things, how do you use the word marketing, and how do you use the word sales, and what's the difference between marketing and what's the difference between sales? If somebody from the sort of the Raleigh project or some new graduate from university comes and says, I want a job in marketing or want a job in sales, what do you tell them marketing is and what do you tell them sales is?
Great question. Yeah, I think those two terms get overlapped quite a bit, but I like to separate them out based upon marketing being more getting your prospects interested and attracted to the brand or your brand, and then interested in your product, and sales being more a case of directly communicating with your prospect and converting that prospect into a customer. So one I think is more a case of getting them to the water, and the other one's getting them to drink it.
Yes, another analogy from a completely different perspective was going through my mind that, in a sense, as you say, attracting people. It's a bit like a lady at a party in a red dress. She goes in a red dress and she's got a nice hairstyle, and that people come to her.
Yeah.
So that's marketing.
Yeah.
You've attracted interest. You then, quotes, hand it off to the sales department, and the sales department has a process, in this case dating and mating, which leads to closing a deal, a signed contract, and you're married.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So that will do for me, and listeners can pick whichever version of the metaphor they like. Moving on from definitions, I always assume that it's self-evident that marketing is essential in the modern world. But when we were chatting before, you were saying that that's kind of, and not everybody makes themselves marketing centric. going back to the DAOofBizDev.com, one of my things that I really liked, and I like to this day, was I came up not with a value chain, but a value circle. So if you imagine 4 boxes in a circle, at the top you've got product, and going round clockwise you've got marketing, at the bottom you've got sales, and up the left at 9 o'clock you've got client. And of course the interaction with the client then leads back into your product development or service development, and then you go round and round and round. And so the more you go round, the better your business gets as a whole. But I guess in the tech world, there are some examples which might persuade people not to bother very much. A prime example being Google. I only ever remember in my life reading one article, that was donkeys years ago, in the Scientific American about this company called Google, and it's got this particular way of doing search and yada, yada, yada. But otherwise, I use Google all the time, I use Chrome, I've got an Android phone, blah, 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 blah. And they've never marketed. And I'm not a Facebook person, but many people have joined Facebook, not as a result of seeing adverts and all that kind of stuff. So, and the same applies to the app banks. I think app banks like Revolut, certainly in the early days, just kind of grew. Quotes without marketing, unquotes. So maybe it's a kind of, as I say, being born 1,000 years ago, it was always obvious to me you had to do marketing. Anyway, you tell me. So I think it's obvious that marketing should be the central function of a company, along with product, of course.
Yeah, well, it's something you mentioned in the intro. There's a lot of sort of build it and they will come. And I think there's a lot of products or individuals out there who create these great products.
As I said with Google, sometimes that works, but it's very rarely.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking maybe, 1 in 1,000, 1 in 100,000. But even then, if you take Google, for example, I mean, they did actually have a certain type of marketing, but perhaps not as obvious as, that meets the eye. Revolut, again, is another example of that. PR in itself is a form of marketing, and therefore, if you've got an exciting, sexy product that's being talked a hell of a lot about in publications, that is your marketing. I think there's a lot of expectation from founders of organisations, especially those come from technical backgrounds, that they're going to create this exciting, sexy product, and people are just going to buy it or use it, and they're going to get hundreds of thousands of users. But ultimately, then you need to seed it in some way, shape, or form. That doesn't necessarily mean marketing is not just paid ads or ads in the paper. It can be PR, it can be word of mouth, it can be content driven. It could be an individual on LinkedIn, for example, talking in and around the service and promoting themselves, their personal brand, alongside their company brand. They're all forms of marketing because, going back to the definition, it's all about getting people interested in the brand, the product and the service. I think a lot of times what I see happen is that none of this seeding activity takes place, and the knee-jerk reaction is to start trying to sell. And the issue with that is that you're then trying to knock on people's door, telling them, hey, you need to buy this product. And the problem is that they don't understand your proposition, they don't know your brand.
You haven't aroused interest in the first place.
Exactly.
So going back to the lady in the red dress at a party, she comes up to you and said, I'd like to marry you. Your immediate reaction is, what?
Well, it depends what she looked like in the red dress, but...
No, of course, but I mean, most men are unlikely to marry someone that comes up to them at a party and says, I want to marry you. The interest needs to be aroused first. I mean, this is another way of looking at marketing. Arouse interest.
Absolutely.
Hey, let me tell you about the podcast. Hey, let me tell you about Growth Gorilla. This is why I think it's really interesting what Shamir's doing. Blah, blah, blah. Oh, you've got to get... I was about to say juices flowing. I won't say that.
Absolutely, that, yeah. It's about inducing that interest and creating that in some way, shape or form.
In the examples you've seen, people, in a sense, in my circle, try and leap from product/service to selling without going to the marketing. Now, one of the key things about marketing, which has only become more important in an extremely overloaded world of information, is you need a simple, clear message. You guys have clearly got one. I can even remember it, having read it once last night, writing up, then once this morning, which is that you help startups and scale-ups catalyse growth. Right, okay, I get that. That's nice and simple and straightforward. So let's talk about the message development bit of it. How does that work? Because what I found myself in various incarnations is it's your baby, you're too close to it. Let me tell you about your baby. Oh, bang on for half an hour or something like that. You don't care about half an hour's information on my baby. You want it sort of, oh yeah, it's 4 kilograms, it's got ginger hair. Oh, fancy that. It's very hard sometimes, and maybe this is where an agency comes in, it's very hard for people who are too close to a product, especially technical people who have created it, to give you a one-sentence summary. They're much better at talking for 5 hours to you about their latest fintech product. It can be very hard for non-marketing people to create, should we say, just a sentence or strapline or something like that. So how does that work in your experience? Message development.
Yeah, absolutely. We normally take our clients through a process where we identify clients' needs, and then from that match the solutions that the proposition is providing, and then move on to giving or creating reasons to believe in that product, and then finally delivering the concrete outcomes. In financial services and in fintech, it's quite different to, I think, when you're selling widgets, whatever that may be, because with financial services and fintech, a lot of the time there's not actually a tangible exchange of the actual product. When someone's not buying something for £5, then you're giving them that widget in return. A lot of the time it's a case of signing up for a proposition or a service, and actually what are they getting from that? So it's about breaking that down and understanding what the concrete outcomes are going to be for your target audience if they sign up with your proposition, whatever it may be. You know, if, say, for example, you're a new fintech bank, what are the immediate concrete results that they're going to get out of that? Or if you're an invoice financing proposition that's now online, what are the actual benefits they're going to get out of that? At the end
sell
of it.
Benefits, not stuff, is something that sticks in mind. And
Exactly
lots of people
that.
try and sell stuff or market stuff.
Exactly that. And that goes down to, someone who's too close to it. They spend a lot of time talking about the features, that they've got this really incredible technology that does all this amazing stuff. But in reality is that your audience doesn't really care too much about that, because we're all inherently selfish at the end of the day, and we care about, how is that product going to impact us and how is it going to benefit us or me.
So in terms of your process, if I can sort of summarise it, I don't know whether you'd agree, which is that you go and see a client who's having challenges around marketing, you understand what they're doing, what they're after and all that kind of stuff, and you've got a methodology for working it out. But in a sense, hopefully not projecting too much onto you, you're doing that and you're thinking about their potential client base. But what you want to find, going back to your sort of word selfish, is you want to find the thing that says, this is a headache tablet. If you've got a headache, take this tablet.
Absolutely.
Because that's all the audience care about. I'm so bloody busy. I'm a prime example. I get thousands of emails per annum. Nightmare. Plenty of them overseas, plenty of them are just sort of tech and that kind of stuff, so you can narrow them down a bit. But anyway, I would guess 1%, tops, send me a nice, simple, clear email saying, hey, Mike, we've checked out your show. We understand you like this kind of stuff. We think that fits into that for the following reason. That's all I want is a two-liner. And then they're going back to arouse interest. Oh, I'm interested. Oh, I'll come back. And I think maybe you did something like this, or one of your colleagues did this with me. Oh, okay, so tell me a little bit more. At which point you hand on to the sales process. But people would just, it reminds me of sort of Vietnam, the carpet bomb a whole bloody country.
Yeah.
With tons of stuff, or not simplify it, or not say, we understand you have this headache, we've got a headache tablet.
Absolutely that. It's identifying that pain point. And if you've got a proposition where you're selling, especially with B2B propositions, for example, where you've got multiple decision makers involved, each of those individuals will have different pain points. Your CFO will have a very different pain point from your CEO. Your users on the ground will have a very different pain point from your CEO. So understanding the individual pain points and then creating simple messages for each of those audiences or each of those buyer personas, allows you to do two things. It allows you to streamline your messaging to target them directly, and it also means that you can then create any content collateral that you need to support the marketing and sales process going forward.
Yes, and the other word for selfish is one that I used a while ago, which is an acronym, WIFM, WIIFM. What's in it for me?
Absolutely.
So in the B2B, you go and see the CEO, let's say he just cuts the chase. Okay, Shamir, what's in it for me, mate? CFO said the same thing. And that.
I found this with we were working with an FX firm, and they were selling into CFOs, and they kept talking about how much money they were going to save, and the amounts were negligible. And the reality was that actually the CFO didn't care about how much money, because we were talking, £50, £100 per trade. It wasn't worth it. And actually, the pill to address the pain point, the magic pill, was, we can actually save you time, because that was more valuable than the £50 or £100 then that they were going to save.
So having started with the work that you do with the client, understanding what they're trying to do and all that kind of stuff, let's just call that understanding the client side, you're now talking about an area which in those companies that are super B2C and need 1 million or 10 million clients is known as market research, and probably called market research if you're trying to sell to 3 mega banks next year or something like that. What is the process whereby a fintech, let's say there's fintechs listening, they're startups, they're building something. One thing about fintech is that you've got to build it very well before you start, because if you download my app and it loses all your bank balance, you're going to be super upset, and I'm never going to recover from that, as opposed to if I'm a chat app, oh, sorry, it was down for 5 minutes. I say I'm never going to recover from that. Monzo keep recovering from being down. But anyway, I'm talking super big picture. So many fintechs, compared to other forms of tech or other forms of company, spend a long time in the product development stuff. They then come to somebody like you and they say, oh yeah, we need to think about this marketing-y thing a little bit more, da-di-da-di-da-di. So, as it were, you go to their garden shed, you spend some time inside their garden shed, see what it's got, and da-di-da-di-da-di. You've got a little idea of the world because you've been around a bit and you're marketing guys. What's the stage where you try and understand what the hell it is CFOs want? For example, in the case of B2B sales, I've done that myself, it's really tough because these guys are super busy. They're not going to spend a sort of an hour filling in a form online telling you all their preferences and challenges. So how does an agency or how do clients actually find out what it is that their target market really wants?
There's a number of ways of doing that, and I suppose actually there's probably two key ways that you can do that. One is the trial and error method, where we take a gauge as what we think the issues and the pain points are, construct a number of messages, and this is really, really easy to do via digital marketing. You can put these messages out, see what attracts attention, engagement, which message gets the clicks, and then double down on that and then create variations of that. Another way of doing it, and I favour both really, I think it just depends upon time and budget really, is conducting market research. So again, you can do quantitative and qualitative. We can get in front of your target audience. For example, we did some work, funny enough, with CFO teams, we're talking about it, doing 35 to 40 minutes in-depth interviews with them about how they use the product, what their concerns are, what the pain points are, and then extrapolate the insights from that, put that together, and then convert that into a message. I think both are very, very fair ways of doing that. And I think, as I said, it boils down to time, budget, resource, what you have. And sometimes, there's always a case that what people say are their pain points aren't necessarily what their pain points are. So you kind of have to do a bit of both.
No, exactly. I mean, 20 years ago, when I created a strategic management tool, I think my first client was Fleming's, the CRO and the CFO. And of course, I'd done all my marketing stuff, I sold it, I closed a decent chunk of six-figure deal and all that kind of thing. So I was busy patting myself on the back. And then going back to real pain points. Once they started using it and got into it and all that kind of stuff, and obviously I knew them quite well, after 6 months, the CRO said to me, do you know what, Mike, this is really good. I said, oh, yeah, thanks. I'm pleased about that. So why do you say that? He said, because for the first time we really know what's going on in our organisation. That was their real need.
Absolutely.
They didn't really know what was going on in the way that I could show them. Or actually, fundamentally, they didn't know what's going on. In a vast business, so much is going on. You've got so much information. You need something that cuts through. They would never in a million years, being a prestigious organisation, have said to me in my first meeting, second or 99th meeting, before I knew them informally enough to, lunch and beer, that kind of stuff, they would never have said, we don't know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. It's, sometimes they don't know that's the case. I think with a lot of, the audience that's listening, if they're starting up or they've got their first sort of, if they're B2B, for example, if they've got their first 50, 100 customers in through the front door, 50 be fine. I would suggest having a panel or a round table and invite in your 10, 20 customers, most active customers, put out a bit of a spread for them and have your team walk around and talk to your customers and gain their feedback one-to-one. I think that's probably the most invaluable thing that you can do. And additionally, it's a great opportunity to get a video crew in there and take a few testimonials which you can use. If you're B2C, I think the same thing applies. You're probably talking at a larger scale, maybe 1,000 users. But again, I would say pick out your core customers there, maybe your top 100 active users, and conduct maybe some sort of online survey, maybe some one-to-one surveys if you can, and see what the feedback is. A big part of what you do and a big part of marketing, or at least the way I like to look at it, is that marketing should be whispering into the ears of product and certainly the CEO, the founder, of your organisation, and talk to them how to make a better product for their audience. And the only way that we can do that is by putting messages out there, and then not being arrogant and just assuming it works, having our ear to the ground and listening to what they're saying, and then constantly improving the message and the product in hand in hand.
Yes, and that absolutely fits into my value circle, not value chain, in that you go round and round and round. And the more time you go around and the more clients you've spoken to, the better you can refine your message and target it and round and round. Having said that, there still are more old-fashioned models, which are more value chain which is you make a Dyson vacuum cleaner and you flog loads of them. Or the podcast is a good example. I was never marketing driven on the podcast in the slightest. It was more like a restaurant. I create a restaurant, I cook this kind of food. If you like this kind of food, come here and I'll keep trying to deliver it to you, and it will change a little bit over time, but just keep you interested in that kind of stuff. So that's a value chain where you end up with somebody sort of bought it, as it were. It doesn't cost anything to buy, but they've downloaded it, they spent their time and attention consuming it. And whilst I do get feedback from people, I've always been a product push mentality. Now, if you read everything about podcasts and content on this kind of stuff, in this sort of spirit, certainly what I think of as an American thing, you want to aim for American soccer moms aged 34 to 39 with blonde hair and demographics and all this kind of stuff. But I think in the case of true art, which is of course what the podcast is, and paintings and music and everything like that, it's much better to follow the product push model. In general, it isn't a good idea, but it is much better to follow it, which is summed up best by Lemmy of Motorhead, who said, play your music, your audience will find you. Now, loads of 18-year-olds talking about when you were young have got guitars and make music and all that kind of stuff, and their audience doesn't find them. Well, that's because their product isn't good enough, or maybe they're not fortunate enough, or whatever. But if you look at the great artists throughout history, some of them weren't even successful like Van Gogh in their lifetime, but they created something of value because they were kind of just doing their thing. So anyway, I just say that to contrast the value chain, which is like a waterfall.
Yeah.
You trying to put out as pure spring water you can. You create a pool. Some people eventually come across it somehow and dip their glass in and think, oh, this is really nice, I like this water. But in other cases, as you're talking, the predominant model really ought to be value circle, where you're going round and round and round and refining it over time.
Yeah, I think especially for the fintech and financial services market, I think if you're selling widgets or your e-commerce retail, then yeah, absolutely, the value chain makes more sense. Things like whether it's banking or trading platforms or whatever, it relies upon volume repeat business, if you want to call it that, and monthly recurring revenue on that basis. So it's fundamental to make sure that once a client is onboarded, that you're taking feedback from them. One of the other things I come across as well is that a lot of companies are very, very successful with onboarding their customers or getting them to sign up. But then there's a big issue with actually getting them to use the product once they've signed up. And the impact of that means that there's not that many active users on the platform. So it's obviously costing a lot of money to acquisition of customer, and it impacts lifetime value. But a lot of the startups, fintech companies that are out there, they're obviously VC backed and they have to report on figures to the powers that be. And active users is a big number. And one of the areas that we focus on, one of the areas that we try to help on as part of this circle is the onboarding element, which is making sure that once you've garnered interest and you've sold them into your product, just making sure that they are happy, they're using your product, they understand it, and there isn't any friction points as well. And then checking in on an ongoing basis as well.
Yes, and thinking about this point about people might download the app or sign up but never actually use it. I mean, 20 years ago, I was a super B2B, by which I mean one client per annum. I could live extremely well, I didn't need 50 to 100. And the mistake that I found out the hard way in that was that it was quite straightforward once I got to see the right people to arouse interest in what I was doing, because it was very unique. It's a bit like the digital avatars we were talking about the other week. Didn't exist anywhere else. Gosh, that's interesting. Goodness knows how I'd use it. And so I could easily get in principle interest, but then the problem was turning it into in practice interest. So what I did for a while until I learned this was the wrong thing was that I did a few pilot studies for free. Okay, look, Shamir, you can't decide today. I tell you what, I'll come round. I'll come to your office for a few days and da-di-da-di-da-di. And what I found was, and you won't be surprised as a marketing guru, that doing free pilot studies was extremely unproductive, because there's plenty of people who don't have enough to do, really, certainly back 20 years ago, and there were that didn't even have the internet to stare at very much. Actually, they did, but they didn't look at very much in the office. So they'd ask for another pilot study, another. And the quotes conversion rate in your vocabulary was very low on that. What I started doing was charging for the pilot study, because I realised that sales now, I hadn't made any sale. If you give something away for free, in my vocabulary, you haven't made a sale. If you haven't made a sale, what it means is that you haven't made your case strongly enough that people have bought in. People haven't actually made a purchase in a way. In principle interest, everybody's in principle interested in loads of things, but will they put their hand in the pocket and put some money on the table? So when I changed my approach from once having aroused interest, I do a free pilot study too, making it a higher hurdle for myself, making it harder on myself, which is my job isn't to meet Shamir today and then try and follow up with a freebie and come around and all that kind of stuff, which is quite free marketing, so there is benefit in doing that sometimes. But I just set a higher hurdle for myself, which is I'm going to come and see you, I'm going to arouse interest, and the end of this process is, look, I'll come and do a pilot study. You're going to pay my bus fare, it'll cost a few grand, but actually this is what you will get out of this few grand pilot study. You'll get this, this and this. And most importantly, you'll know whether it's worth spending $500,000 on this or not fairly rapidly. So I turned that into actually trying to sell something. Made it much harder, I got less pilot studies, but the conversion rate was far better.
Yeah, it's actually something I refer to as a foot in the door. A low-value sale, a low-value product, something that gets some sort of commitment. I think that, in the example of B2B sales, it might be a low-end, ticket value. In the case of something like, a trading platform or, an insurance product or whatever's out there, it might be a case that you're getting them to commit their contact details or if it's a banking product, a minimum funding amount per month or something that gets them to go, okay, well, it's not a big purchase, but at least it's a minimum that they can adhere to. And I think by doing that, and I absolutely agree, the amount of fluff that you get reduces quite rapidly, but the users that you get become core users that become evangelists for your product, your early adopters. And I think that's hugely important for, any organisation that's, trying to push out their services to ensure that they are getting maximum ROI out of their spend, out of their time as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I've heard that called the ATM model, the ascending transaction model. So originally, my kind of marketing and sales model was, for the sake of argument, a 6-foot high jump. And I'd get a client, come on, run and jump. Funny enough, that was quite tricky. So a different model is a staircase model. The first step on the staircase isn't a very big one, but at least they're starting moving up the staircase. And I think the whole process needs to have something about that, or at least when people, let's just turn this from walking up a staircase or high jumps into financial commitment, that at least when people are not asked to make a large financial commitment, whatever large means in that particular marketplace, they have the certainty in their own mind. Basically, they can convince their boss and their boss's boss that this was a rational decision even if it doesn't work out. Because that's what people are really thinking when they're spending money, which is, maybe this won't work. Shit, if this doesn't work, God, maybe I'll be in the shit. So it's kind of fear, really.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it goes back to people just being inherently selfish. They're worried about their own skin at the end of the day and the answers that they have to give to the powers that be above them.
Okay, so in terms of these different hurdles and sizes of hurdles and utterly mixed metaphors, then obviously, and I think we can take this as read, as the listeners will know all this, one of the things about fintech and finance as a whole, FS, as you say, isn't a thing. You're not a door-to-door brush salesman. Here's the brush, you can look it, feel it, get some idea. You're actually getting a brush. Goodness knows what happens when I press go on your app with my sort of bank account details. So trust is necessary, we can take that for read. So just to wrap up the main course, Shamir, can you give us some examples of when these things are done well? I mean, we talked at the beginning about the mistakes that people make when it's done sort of badly, but what kind of results have you seen?
I think we look at some of the broader examples, when marketing's done well. In the fintech world, I think the poster child for having done well is certainly Monzo. They've targeted their audience absolutely fantastically. They picked up an early adopter audience. They've gone for the millennial audience that are more interested in experiential outputs as opposed to physical outputs. They've turned themselves into almost a fashion accessory with their debit card. You see people walking down the street with the Monzo card in their hand.
And all this metal card stuff
as
well.
Yeah, exactly.
Our USP is our card isn't made of plastic, it's metal. Oh, God.
Exactly that. And they've turned something that doesn't have tangible value into something tangible by giving them this card. And their messaging is absolutely fantastic. I think another great example is Starling Bank as well. They've removed all of the fluff that smaller businesses, SMEs have with their banking propositions and completely digitised that, and they've removed any barriers to entry and any concerns. And then they've coupled that now with, in fact, they're doing a really, really fantastic out-of-home campaign at the moment that you're seeing them all in, in the major stations, on the sides of buses, but then also within your news feeds on your Facebooks and your LinkedIn. As for the ones that have done badly, well, I can't give you, it's difficult to give an example.
Most of them, about 99% you don't hear of, yes.
Yeah, it's hard to tell you which ones have done badly. Frankly, the ones that haven't made it, they've blown their seed round or their Series A because they never got out the stable doors, really. And I think, rather than give an example, we can talk about, take a few minutes to talk about the reasons why. And in fact, I can think of a bad example, but I don't want to say their name.
Company X.
Company X, and one of the reasons that they are inherently going to fail is purely for the fact that they've got about 10 months worth of runway left. They're not doing any marketing at all at the moment because they're absolutely dead set on the fact that they're going to attract users by pure osmosis. The reality is that they won't. They're dealing with a financial services product that's investment-based, that's completely insular, that their target audience, and most people within financial services do not like to talk about their finances publicly. They do not share, spread, or talk about their investments amongst their peers. It's a very British English thing to do. And because of that, there's no member get member, there's no word of mouth there at all whatsoever. If anything, especially in trading in these sorts of products, people don't want to talk about their wins or their losses. And that mindset and that stubborn mindset of we will build it and they will come, looping back to what we were talking about at the beginning, we'll see them slowly burn through their funding. I think my advice would be for them is that there's a very, very low barrier of entry to do some marketing, and it doesn't have to involve any spend at all whatsoever. It can be just simply getting one of your founders out there or a spokesperson out there to start talking about your product to your immediate audience on social channels, out to the press, and go on a few podcasts.
Indeed. So, wrapping this up, as you say, looping round, we were talking at the beginning about the importance of marketing centricity. I mean, the trouble with sort of centric is that everything can't be at the centre. But just coming back to my sort of 4 subsections of business, you've got product/service, you've got marketing, you've got sales, you've got client. And if you've got 10 months, you can't stick all your chips on product.
Absolutely.
It's going to be so good. But anyway, good. Right. Okay. So, and as you mentioned, not just being on podcasts, the best medium, and I'm actually not joking on this, I'm talking about my experience of clients, is branding with podcasts. So before I put the show, I'd like to thank all my listeners out there and my valued brand partner for the podcast, Smart Pension, who are fast, secure and free. Check out their UK workplace pensions at autoenrollment.co.uk. So wrapping up then, Shamir, I think you mentioned a little bit about your growth marketing agency. Very briefly, how do you market marketing? Without going into half an hour, we don't have time for that. And what messages would you like to give the millions of listeners listening to your every word?
How I market marketing? Very, very simply, aligning myself with publications, businesses, media that shares the audience that I'm trying to get in front of. That's pretty much it. I suppose the sort of key things or the key areas that we focus on really, and how your listeners could use us. Probably sort of 3 focus or 3 key areas. We conduct workshops, growth workshops that help align stakeholders, isolate key metrics, put together customer value propositions in creating roadmaps for your marketing. We also help in terms of implementation, so cross-channel, multi-channel marketing across social media, Google AdWords, that sort of stuff, and more unusual things like podcasts and content strategy as well. And I suppose the last area is that if you're great at doing all of those things, but they're just not converting, they're just not sticky enough, then we can help you with the growth element or the onboarding element, where we can help implement elements of marketing automation, onboarding strategy, and help you with your retention and reactivation.
Oh, that's nice and succinct. You've clearly spent time working on your message and your physician with good health. You mentioned PR firms before, and sometimes people get a bit mixed up about the role of a PR firm. What I see a PR firm is people who get your messages into an audience. What I see, rightly or wrongly, marketing growth agency, is going back to my circle of product, service, marketing, sales, client, is somebody who will join, reinforce or strengthen or improve your channel that goes from product to sales, or as you say, where people aren't getting the conversion, product and a long way towards client.
Yeah, Mike, if I understand the question correctly, I think what you're simply saying is that we as an agency, we walk in, we assess the areas of strengths and weakness and go in and help our clients reinforce the areas that they're weakest on, and end up with this robust circle that you've been speaking about, this product, marketing, sales and client. Absolutely, yeah. Excellent.
Well, it's a super important area. We've had quite a kick around today. As always, these kind of shows, a bit like the one we did on recruitment and getting jobs and all that, aren't linear content. They aren't sort of a lecture. You can go to YouTube for all that kind of stuff. But what I hope is that listeners, in terms of hearing all the sort of things we discussed and all that, will be able to reflect on their own businesses, and there's always scope for opportunity in life. We could go to the gym more, we could eat healthier food and all this kind of stuff, and the same applies to businesses. There's always a lot of stuff to improve. So actually I didn't ask you, or didn't mention, what your website is, or whether Google will know that Growth Gorilla means you, Shamir. How do people find you?
Of course, yeah. You can visit our website at growthgorilla.co.uk.
2 L's in gorilla.
2 L's in gorilla, yeah. Spelt the traditional way. And you could add me on LinkedIn, Shamir Sachdev. There's only one of me. Or you can email me at shamir@growthgorilla.co.uk.
Excellent. Well, it's a super important area for businesses. You've clearly got some interesting experience there, and I wish you every success in the future.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike.
Thanks for listening. If you have consulting, advisory/non-exec, or media needs in the FS or fintech space, get in touch with me at mike@londonfintechpodcast.com.
We could sit in a bend there all day, watching the firelight dance, watching the firelight dance. We could walk in the mountains before dawn, watching a happy moonrise, watching a happy moonrise. Come away from the city, with the tarmac so dead and the people so sad. Come away from the city, with the faces so grey, with the pain of the everyday. We are wild like the mountains and the trees. Can you see what I mean? Can you see what I mean? We fit in between the earth and the sky. Kiss the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye, wave the city goodbye. The city goodbye. Watch the firelight dance with me. 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 Watch the firelight dance with me.